All right, guys, we're back with the Reddit React series. Hello and welcome to BusyWorksBeats.com. The question for today is, why have so many legendary recording studios closed? The poster says, I know the list is longer, but for brevity's sake, let's take a look. So this is by 30A Forever on Reddit. They say a tracking room in Nashville is closed, a legendary open live room, legendary brick wall drum room, Shania Twain, Taylor Swift, etc. is closed. The next studio, Little Mountain Sound in Vancouver, Bob Rock's former home base, is closed. He says Longview Farms, Aerosmith, Rolling Stones, etc. is closed. Sound City, no intro needed, is closed. And the poster says, is it by pure coincidence that these historic studios shuttered, and had any been managed or run better, they'd still be here? Tracking Room was especially surprising considering Nashville still makes records the way Nashville has always made records. Were any of these or any of the other standalone historic studios the result purely of poor management and not a reflection of the state of the recording industry at large? So his question is basically, what's up with these studios closing? So I'll give you guys some insight behind the scenes. Is studio owners look at their studios, most of them, the good ones, like hotels. Okay, it's a hospitality business. It's not a music business. It's a hospitality business. If you're building this mega luxurious studio, you want all the things to accommodate for celebrities who might book time there, or people who are just wealthy to book time there. It's not really built for the average Joe as a customer. And the reason I say that is because that would be the factor to make somebody decide to record there or not. It's not the fact that they could do it at home. It's not the fact that there's another studio that's cheaper. What they're competing on is the experience and the customer service for that specific location for hospitality. So in that regard, the question is, what happened in 2020? We had a huge event that stopped all physical appearances for the most part, and that was the pandemic. Now, why is that important? It's because if studios are seen as a hospitality business the same way hotels are seen as a hospitality business, what happened to hotels during the pandemic? You guys saw how much support they had to get to even stay in business. A lot of them, I don't know everybody's business behind the scenes, but I could assume there were a lot of breaks behind the scenes financially for these companies to get subsidized, or, they had funding of like massive, funding behind them to sustain that time off. Whereas music studios that don't have these, they're not backed by these huge banks. They can't just float for 2 years without any physical business. And so because music is so collaborative, you need people close to each other. So that's the first reason I think these studios are seeing the effects of not having that business for 1 to 2 years. Okay, so secondly, in understanding studios is that, let me go back to the original poster's question here. So it says, I know the list is longer, but for brevity's sake, let's take a look. Tracking Room, Little Mountain Sound, Longview Farms. So even if we're not talking about legendary studios, you want to think about all the recording business. Okay, here's a story that's real. I know a recording studio that was known for not just recording music, and it wasn't like a super high-end studio either, but they weren't just known for recording music. They offered a service of tape duplication. And so the reason that's important of me saying that is because tape duplication was the actual revenue generator. The recording the music was not the real revenue generator. So again, why is that important? Because if the primary source of why the business is making money now changes in the music industry to where we have to now adapt, like what is the modern day tape duplication? There is none. It's distribution. So if these companies don't own distribution companies for music, they don't own the tape duplication part of the business. Therefore, they're not going to have that revenue source if it's a huge revenue source. So the modern tape duplication is music distribution, aka DistroKid, TuneCore, whoever else. So they don't own that business. So they lost a ton of revenue because of that. And so what I'm saying is the recording side, like the glamorous side, is not always the thing that makes that studio a ton of money. So just that quick little story about tape duplication should show you guys these studios are just like your businesses. You might have something you do on the front end, like my YouTube videos. I do this on the front end to show people there's a lot more value in what we have in our ecosystem of stuff: courses, sounds, plugins, etc., etc. So this YouTube stuff is just to grab people's awareness and attention to show them the other stuff that we created. So the same with the recording studio, the recording itself, the hours, let's say a recording studio charges $80 an hour. Okay, they have to pay the engineer if the engineer comes with the room. If not, you got your own engineer, so it might be cheaper. But let's say it's $80 an hour. You pay the engineer $20 an hour, so you profit $60 an hour. But you still have to pay the cost of the building, the equipment, any damages. Okay, so now, I don't know the average day's worth of electricity used in a studio, but the studios have all this equipment. The outboard gear is always turned on most of the time, burning up a lot of electricity. So that bill could be $20 to $30 per day per room. But let's just say it's $20 or $30 per day. Okay, so that's at least $1,000 a month on electricity. And so now it went from $60 profit to $30. So $30 an hour. Most people who go to the studios are making that. So the studio doesn't have this huge profit margin anymore when it comes to recording people. You can, but metaphorically, there aren't enough customers who are willing to pay $200 an hour, $300 an hour. That's super high end, by the way. Even $100 an hour for recording, because it just costs too much for the product at hand. And if there aren't enough, the music industry changed in the way that before, to get your music out there, quite literally, you would have a band. And the band did live shows. And the point of recording was so that you could duplicate your live show so that you don't have to keep performing live over and over and over again. Like before the days of like mass duplication, they would have to perform the song again. Okay, and it would become this repetitive process. Perform the song, perform it again, just to get one recording to then be copy number one. And then copy number two would be slightly different. Copy number three would be slightly different. So they found that inefficient. And so what they did was they figured out how to duplicate the one recording of that band. So now they did one recording. They mass produced those physical copies. But to do that, it cost a lot of money. And because in the older days, music was so expensive to make, it created a barrier of entry. So the only people who could truly compete on that level were people who would have to get a record label deal, because the record label would fund the actual project and the recording process. That's why the record label was important, because the only way truly to get into music, for example, if I was a band, I have an idea and I need to go to a studio to even record the idea. So from that point, I now have to record the idea and I have to get it onto some kind of physical media to get into the physical stores. So not only do I need a studio that can record me, I needed a studio that can multiply the recording, which again is that tape duplication or whatever the process was back then, depending on the studio. And then I needed the tapes, the physical tapes, to go to a physical store for selling. And that logistics problem was something that the record labels used to handle. Hence, disc repair damages clauses in the contracts and all that stuff, is because it was like making a video game. You had to have the developers make the game. You had the game to be printed on CD. You had to get the video game in the stores. Nowadays, most of the stuff is digital, so we don't require all that physical processing in the middle. And so modern day artists, for the most part, don't require all those things that we needed back in the day, which created that barrier of entry. And so a lot of these studios that you guys are listing, their whole business model was built around those first problems, the problem of recording for one, and the problem of distribution and mass duplication. So now that those things are really taken care of with the democratization of music production gear, we have interfaces that most interfaces have converters that sound the same for the most part. They have preamps that sound the same for the most part. Okay, so there's no huge difference like it was before. You couldn't really do this stuff at home back in the day, affordably at home. Okay, so all these advents now made the beginning of that supply chain almost irrelevant, because now all we need the music studio to do is record. There's no need for duplication and there's no need for distribution. Okay, so now two of those huge revenue sources are now out, because on physical goods, you can make a ton of profit, because you can't, what I'm trying to say is, to compete against a record label or a studio that had access to like pure manufacturing tools and all this type of stuff, the average person didn't have all that. So they didn't have as much competition. Like I said, nowadays, the recording studio is mostly known just for recording and sometimes like education or different things like that. So all the studios, not just a couple, all of the studios are now having to retool their factory. What are they going to make money from? And like I said, the recording part was just thing to get people in the door. The other money was made from manufacturing and, or sorry, I say duplication and distribution. So now that those whole business models were threatened, it's like, what does the recording studio have left? And if the city, the city only has but so many musicians, it only has but so many people who want to record. You have more studios opening up that are more modern, that are, using less overhead, but still getting clients because they don't need all the extra stuff. They just need somebody to record. I see people going to big studios, like big room studios, just to record a terrible rap song that's out of key. And, it's people who aren't even into music like that. So if they're wasting their money buying this big room to feel better about the recording, imagine all the people who just need a small room. They're not going to pay $80 to $100 an hour for this big room for no reason. They just want their song done and just want to hit record and have an engineer to help them mix it, their vocals or whatever. And that's where the business has changed fundamentally. But, what you guys bring up in this post here is more so, we had a lot of critical factors. Again, like I said, there's so many things. The pandemic caused a lot of physical businesses to just shut down, basically. Even the businesses that didn't shut down, they're dealing with the aftermath of missing out on those key revenue sources for that amount of time. They didn't have the funding to, float them that long. Thirdly, is when we're talking about these big studios, they're in the hospitality business. And just like Airbnb threatened the hotel business, you have people who are creating studios that are threatening, I'll say, the classic studio business model. Again, the average person who might be a more frequent customer to go to these studios is not really going to these studios because they don't have the need to, like if somebody's just going to drive, they just need a ride to work. Do they really need a Ferrari Uber to pick them up to go to work? Or do they just need somebody who has a car to get them from point A to point B safely? And it's usually the latter. So there are less customers who have these huge budgets to even afford what these studios offer. So the demand went down. And when the demand goes down, that means prices usually have to go down, which means the profit margin gets smaller and smaller. And like I said before, even if I charge $80 an hour for a studio, let's say I give the engineer $20 an hour, so that's down to $60. And let's say it costs me $30 an hour for electricity. So that's what, $50 of that gone. So now they're down to $30 profit on $80 an hour sessions. And how many people do you know charge more than $80 an hour? Not a lot, because that's considered, beginning to consider it the high end of recording for the most part. Okay, 82. Once it reaches like 100, that's considered high end and above. Okay, so that's the backstory of a lot of these studios. I don't know these studios exactly, so I'm not putting this on these brands exactly, but here's another thing, is my last point, is that a lot of these studios they're run off of what's called a key person. And like you mentioned in the original post, it says, what does it say? One of these, Bob Rock's former home base, for example, he was so legendary because he created the brand for that specific place, or he made the brand poppin' for that specific place. And once that person leaves the equation, now that place doesn't have the same importance. It doesn't have the same credibility. It doesn't have the same social proof. And so any business with a key person and the key person leaves is now at risk because all the business relied on that one person. So if they never pivoted to create another key person, then that's why some of these studios may be struggling demand wise. Again, it could be any one of those reasons I just explained. But what most people don't understand is that professional commercial studios are like hotels. It's a hospitality business. It's way more than just the recording of the audio. It's how do they treat their clients? Do they have peripheral stuff the client can get into? How do they cater to the client's specific needs? Some even offer like suites for the client, so that when they're flying in from a different city, they could just stay at the studio and just record, sleep in the suite, come back down to the studio, record because they have to before they fly off onto their next location for tour, whatever it is. So it's a hospitality business, and that's what people don't understand about studios. It's not just about the music business. One last thing I think I forgot to say was think about the music industry's priorities and budgets. Where do budgets really come from if you guys think about it? Huge music industry budgets came from film. It's because film was the ultimate end goal for music, and video games became the new kind of end goal, but film was always the end goal. Big budgets where they're paying $5,000 for like 30 seconds of music, that's film. Okay, because films are getting massive amounts of funding. There's tons of investors in film. There's all these actors that attract, business from around the world. You have all the brands who want to put their product placement into these movies. And so the movie is the ultimate sales letter, or sales video letter, or video sales letter. That's what I'm trying to say. Ultimate sales video. Okay. Like if we watch E.T., there's a reason E.T. was led with the Reese's or whatever. If you watch, I'm sure some Christmas movie out there, it has Coca-Cola, because they want to brand that brand with that specific scenario or that specific time of year, whatever it is. And so once you understand that all the money comes from the end goal, basically advertising. Okay. If movies were the end goal, then movies paid the music industry. The music industry paid the musicians. That's how the money flowed. So if those opportunities are lesser than, or they're moving to different, people for different reasons, then that's why you guys may be seeing the demand lower as far as these key studios that needed, all these specific requirements for making a specific sound. I'll leave it at that, but I want you guys to think about that and just understand again, the key difference is that pro studios were hospitality businesses. All right, guys, subscribe if you're new. Peace.